West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
The Senate is back in session today. The House is set to return next week, and lawmakers have a long list of items waiting for them. At the top of the list, the federal budget, which is set to expire on September 30th and will need to be renewed to avoid a full-fledged government shutdown. Also hanging in the balance is the fallout from Senator Tommy Tuberville's hold on military nominations.
This is getting so serious.
Branches.
You now have the leaders of the branches of our services, armed services, saying you're really, really damaging readiness for our troops across the world.
I don't know what he thinks he's doing. This is on military nominations. There's a hold because of him. 3 of America's 5 military branches do not have a Senate-confirmed service chief in place. Many generals and admirals being forced to perform 2 roles simultaneously. That fact has prompted the secretaries of the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army to co-write an op-ed for the Washington Post entitled 3 Service Secretaries to Tuberville. Stop this dangerous hold on senior officers. And they write in part, we are proud to work alongside exceptional military leaders who are skilled, motivated, and empowered to protect our national security. These officers and the millions of service members they lead are the foundation of America's enduring military advantage. Yet, this foundation is being actively eroded by the actions of a single U.S. Senator, Tommy Tuberville, who is blocking the confirmation of our most senior military officers. Thus far, the hold has prevented the Defense Department from placing almost 300 of our most experienced and battle-tested leaders into critical posts around the world. 3 of our 5 military branches, the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps, have no Senate-confirmed service chief in place.
It's sickening.
Instead, these jobs and dozens of others across the force are being performed by acting officials without the full range of legal authorities necessary to make the decisions that will sustain the United States military edge.
They can't make the decisions that they need to make. That's impacting readiness. And I know Tommy Tuberville doesn't care, obviously.
But he knows
on
this.
On a personal level, planning for service families, for children of service members. They should be in their new locations, in their new schools. Everything's been held up. Their lives have been put on hold because the promotions aren't going through. And then, of course, planning for our military, long-term planning for our military can't be done because, as these service chiefs said, they don't have a full range of power to make a lot of those decisions. So readiness is at risk. And Willie, the Republicans are forfeiting what they always claim to have, which is some special link with the military, despite the fact they've spent years trashing the United States military, saying they wish they were more like Russians, saying that they're weak, saying that they're woke. That's all a lie. Our military is stronger than it's ever been. And relative to the rest of the world, the strongest it's been since 1945. And yet you have one Republican senator that other Republican senators are allowing him to do. One Republican senator damaging the readiness of the United States Armed Forces in a way that just makes Vladimir Putin, it makes the communist Chinese, makes the North Koreans, makes everybody so happy that one senator is able to damage the United States military's readiness as much as Tommy Tuberville is able to do that. Again, you've got to start asking, why is he doing this? The Republicans supposedly don't want him to do this. The people of Alabama don't want him to do this. Why does he continue acting in a way that damages the readiness of the United States military? It just makes no sense.
And he says he's doing it because he doesn't want the military to allow its service members to travel between states for abortions, for reproductive care. So this is the political hill he's willing to die on. And you're right, people like Mitch McConnell saying, I disagree with what Senator Tuberville is doing. But in our Senate, under our rules, he can do it. Well, do you not have any power? Do the other Republican leadership not have any power over Senator Tuberville to say, hey, knock this off, you've made your point? John, I'll add some more numbers here. The Pentagon said last week 301 generals and admirals are sitting in limbo right now, including 83 3-star and 4-star nominations, generals, pending right now. And again, a lot of Republicans in the Senate have said they disagree with what Tuberville's doing, but he continues and he will continue. And this has become his pet issue. His argument last week, he said, people have known for a long time that the U.S. military is top heavy, saying we have too many generals so that this isn't a big deal, in his view.
Right. And this is the first time in history that so many of these seats have sat open. Of course, this isn't just impacting generals. It's impacting regular troops and their families who can't know what the future holds because they're on hold, because they are in limbo because of this. And there are multiple things going on here. We just mentioned McConnell. This is one of the things that's raised eyebrows among those in Washington, wondering if McConnell's grip on power is a little diminished right now with his ongoing health challenges. He pushes back on that, but that is persistent in D.C. right now. Democrats have been sharply critical of this throughout. Senate Majority Leader Schumer has denounced this at every turn. The unhappiness behind the scenes from Republicans is growing, but there hasn't been a push to get Tuberville to stop. There simply haven't. And they're willing to let him, even if they're privately unhappy, they're letting him command the stage like this. And it comes at a moment, of course, where we have a land war in Europe, where the United States is trying to increase its readiness posture because of that, because of potential challenges from China down the road, from rogue actors like North Korea and Iran. Those in the White House are furious about this, and it becomes evident nearly every day from President Biden, who is loath to criticize his former Senate colleagues by name, those he served with, those he didn't, but he has such respect for the institution. He is no longer loath to criticize Senator Tuberville for what he's doing.
George Conway, back when we were Republicans, we used to take great pride at how much we fought for the strengthening of the United States military, the readiness of the United States military. I was on the armed services, 4 terms for a reason, because that's what my constituents wanted. That's what Republican constituents used to want. Now we have Republicans who are saying the United States military, which is the strongest in the world, just is. There's just not a close second. We now have Tommy Tuberville Republicans saying that, the military's top heavy. Who said that? Nobody. Nobody that knows anything about how strong our military is. Then you got Republicans saying we need to be more like the Russians. We need to be more manly like the Russians military. You've got Republicans that say that our military's weak and it's woke, and Republicans saying that our leaders are stupid and fat pigs. The insults just keep flying towards extraordinarily strong, vital United States military. And if anybody thinks they're weak and well, just ask the 500 Russian troops that tried to bum rush the United States military in Syria a few years back. You can't really ask them because they were all gunned down, all blown apart in about 3 minutes. So why is it that just Republicans have this blind spot when it comes to how strong and how successful and how good our United States military is? Why do these Republicans hate the United States military so much?
They hate the United States military because it's part of the United States government. And this is basically, the Republicans have become anti-American, anti-government, anti the United States. That's their shtick now. That's why you see them attacking law enforcement, the FBI, the Justice Department, state and federal prosecutors, and they attack the institutions that normally Republicans were very, very supportive of. And what now is just this nihilistic attack on American institutions. And it's also brings to mind the fact that we live in a completely different era now. I mean, the Senate rules that allow one senator to block a unanimous consent agreement to have these batch nominations sent to the floor. I mean, all these rules, these arcane Senate rules that we talk about, that we don't really talk about, but have just curious effects, depend on good faith of the members, good faith and collegiality of the members. And that's one thing that the Republican Party has completely abandoned, which is not just the truth, but good faith and just collegiality.
It is Tuesday, the 5th of September of 2023. And you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl. And she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. It always has, and it always will. Okay, so what a Labor Day, huh? Man, talk about Twitter imploding. And I mean imploding. And I mean Twitter, too. It's not going to be X. I like shitter, though. Put the X in front of the word and replace it with the T, or replace the T with an X and call it shitter. But it's going to be Twitter, and it looks like the Anti-Defamation League may end up owning Twitter. I hope so. I got my fingers crossed. It looks like Elon wants to sue the ADL for defamation, and I and a lot of others said, bring it on. Because Discovery's a two-way street, you stupid apartheid blood emerald heir. Jeez. Yeah, he's whining that his ad revenue is decreasing because of the Jews. Yeah, I like that. Got rid of the people that answer the phone when media companies call up to ask a question. When you tweet at Twitter to get a question, your reply is the shit emoji. Replatform Nazis, anti-vaxxers, Russian propaganda. Went into partnership with the Saudis, who then went and tried to dig in deep to find 6,000 dissidents who insulted the kingdom. Even accounts that they're going to kill a guy. They're going to take his head off. He had 5 followers. Insulted the king, they say. Going to take his head off. Musk did that. He colluded with the Saudis and gave up information on his users, and now a foreign government is going through that deep data. So are they going to stop with Saudi citizens, or are they going to just send out their goons to off people anywhere who happen to insult the kingdom? But if only the Jews hadn't forced everybody to treat him that way, right? Unbelievable. And this guy has government contracts. I want to know why this guy still has government contracts. If we're so beholden to Starlink, then I say nationalize Starlink and any other financial holding this Nazi, apartheid, blood emerald heir, racist anti-Semite has. He doesn't like it here? There's a place that writes in Cyrillic that he can live at this very moment. Goodbye. So when he was partying with the Sauds up there in the booth with Jared during the World Cup, was that the World Cup? Yeah. Back a ways, beginning of summer, not the last one here with the Women's World Cup. But the last big international meetup of soccer. It was in maybe it was in the United Arab Emirates. And the Saudis were there, and they were up in their little suite. Their big suite. And there was Elon, and there was Jared. Yep. He went into business with the Saudis, and now they're tracking down people and killing them. Russian propaganda increased almost the day he took it over. And now he's pretty much rewriting the pamphlet that old Henry Ford passed around, the International Jew, an expanded version of the Elders of Zion. And this guy has government contracts. Nationalize his shit, civil asset forfeiture, everything else, and put this effer on the street. Better yet, put him in the playa during a rainstorm. Make him an installation. I'm not saying burn him at the end, but, sometimes people got to get rid of all the bad energy. Stuff his pockets with your grievances, and then, I don't know, see what happens. Jenna Ellis is really mad. Yeah. She can't make up her mind, if she's still a MAGA or if she's all in for Ron DeSantis, which is still being a MAGA. Let's be clear about that. She doesn't like Marjorie too much either. Well, you F around, Jenna. You're going to find out. And, don't worry. They have chaplains in prison. You'll be able to continue your heresy. Your heretic. That's what I'm trying to say. Heretic endeavors. Heretical endeavors. That's what I call it. I'm making up words this morning. I need more coffee. That's my excuse. All right. Well, what else is going on? Enrique Tarrio is going to find out pretty soon here, too. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that he doesn't get his sentence halved like all the others. Oh, I know. 17 years is a long time. So what? 33 years is even longer. I like that number. All right. So we'll find out. And then tomorrow, the fake elector scam people are going to be coming under judicial scrutiny. They will. Oh, but some good news. Alabama, once again, a court has told them that they are way off base and they lose. They can't run out the clock anymore, and a special master will be drawing the maps now. Because apparently Alabama's out there saying, we don't need to follow what the northern aggressors tell us to do. At the same time, Tuberville is blocking all those military confirmations. He only takes his orders in Cyrillic, though. Okay, let's be clear. Only. What else do we have in store for you here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, since I let the cat out of the bag about the clip that we had up at the top? All right. Well, on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe, the government, that would be us, is eager to restore its powers to keep dangerous chemicals out of extremist hands after Rand Paul objected to renewing the bill authorizing it. After nearly 30 years, Pennsylvania will end state funding for anti-abortion counseling centers. 30 years. Get rid of them. And a Georgia trial arguing that redistricting harmed black voters could decide control of a U.S. House seat. It's not just Alabama. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Northern Ireland's top police officer resigned following a series of controversies, including an industrial-scale data breach. And Russian authorities arrested a mathematician on terrorism charges minutes after his release from 4 years in detention on a hooliganism conviction. They just don't give up, do they? All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. The bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. And just a reminder, Kelly and Ricky have a show called the Late Night Early Morning Show on Saturdays. So, well, Saturday, Sunday, very late, early morning. So check them out. It's live, by the way. So thank you, Kelly, for everything you do. And thank you, Ricky, too. And now if you folks out there in radio listening land would look across the page, our homepage at netrootsradio.com to the left from that chat room link, hopefully you will then notice the link to our Patreon page. And if you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, once a month, thus becoming a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it really does help us pay our bills, and then we get to fly under the radar and continue this powerhouse of resistance that has been resisting for over 13 years. Yes, we're here, and lots of resisting needs to be done, and we're situated to do it, and we have you to thank for your generosity in allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many, many years ago. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Shitter, it's Shitter now. Also on Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky. I think I sent Tom the codes for the Blue Sky account, so he'll get on that. But find us on social media at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of all of those. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Shitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, wherever at Justice Putnam, or simply just Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary. It's going to be diary, not story. Come on now. It gets posted 10 minutes before showtime, and those show notes and links are where you can find, well, the links to the actual articles that we take such care to mangle and twist into our own devious devices. We do that. But we give you the source material because that's what we do. And you can find that by following my social media feeds because the links are all right there. You can also follow the show on Shitter. It's just a placemat for now. I'll get it on the other platforms as I keep promising. But you can find the show on Shitter at Cookbook West. And please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes. Just not Stitcher. Okay? Just not because of Sirius XM. And they're not nice. They just are not. Okay. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by Rebecca Santana from the Associated Press. The government is worried about the safety of chemical facilities across the country after its power to keep dangerous substances out of the hands of extremists lapsed a month ago. The Department of Homeland Security has long had the ability to inspect facilities where chemicals are used or stored to make sure their security systems are in place. And the facilities themselves have been required to vet prospective employees for any terrorism links. But the program called the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards expired on July 28th after Congress, the House, the Republican House, failed to renew it. Homeland Security officials say this left gaping holes in the country's national security, and they are calling on Congress, the Republican House, to act quickly when it returns this week. Actually, I'm a bit conflated here. It's not so much the House as it is certain member of the Senate. But the House has part of the issue here, too. The risk that terrorists could access and weaponize the dangerous chemicals produced in these facilities increases by the day, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas told attendees at the Chemical Security Summit held in Northern Virginia last week. Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene's going to want to impeach him over this, too, because of a certain senator holding things up. We'll get to that in a moment. The program requires any facility that has a certain quantity of any of a long list of chemicals of interest to report the information to the Department of Homeland Security. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which falls under DHS, then determines whether the facility is considered high risk and therefore must develop a security plan. The agency assesses the plan to make sure it addresses things like physical as well as cybersecurity, and then it does inspections to make sure companies are in compliance. There are more than 300 chemicals on the list, including substances like chlorine and sodium nitrate. There are about 3,200 high-risk facilities across the country, according to agency data. Now, none of them are being inspected. The regulations apply not just to chemical manufacturing or distribution companies, but to any facility that uses chemicals in certain quantities, such as those related to agriculture, plastics, or pharmaceuticals, to name a few. Facilities also send the names of prospective employees to Homeland Security so they can be checked for links to extremist groups. CISA official Kelly Murray said at the conference that before the program expired, about 300 names per day were being run through databases. That has stopped. Congress gave the department the authority to begin the chemical security program in 2006, and it went into effect the following year. But Congress also has to renew the authority every few years. So far it has, except this summer. The House overwhelmingly voted to reauthorize it, but then the Senate failed to do so after that senator I mentioned, Rand Paul, raised objections. Paul a Kentucky Republican, said in a July 26 congressional speech that such regulations favor big businesses because they create a barrier to new companies coming into the market, and that even if these regulations didn't exist, companies would still keep security measures in place out of self-interest. Typical libertarian dodge, and then what happens when it gets put into effect? Right-wing domestic terrorists will get these chemicals because there's no way to track them. Coincidence? Brooke Schultz and Kimberly Cruzy of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. For nearly 30 years, Democratic and Republican lawmakers in Pennsylvania have approved millions of taxpayer dollars for an anti-abortion program. Now, the state's new governor plans to end the contract as the organization that distributes those funds and other groups like it gain attention since the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Pennsylvania plans to end on December 31st its long-standing contract with the nonprofit Real Alternatives, the first organization in the nation to secure significant state and federal subsidies to support anti-abortion counseling centers. Under the program, Real Alternatives distributed the state and federal funds to dozens of Pennsylvania centers, including Catholic charities, anti-abortion counseling centers, and maternity homes, which provide support and housing for pregnant women. Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro said in a statement his administration would not continue that pattern of subsidizing the organization, saying he was steadfast in defending abortion access. We will ensure women in this Commonwealth receive the reproductive health care they deserve, he said. Also of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Democrats could gain a seat in the U.S. House and multiple seats in Georgia's legislature if a judge rules Republicans drew maps illegally, weakening black voters' power. The trial beginning today, Tuesday, is part of a wave of litigation progressing after the U.S. Supreme Court earlier this year stood behind its interpretation of the Voting Rights Act, rejecting Alabama's challenge to the law. The Voting Rights Act says the voting district cannot result in discriminatory effects against minority voters who must be allowed a chance to elect candidates of their choosing. Court cases challenging district lines drawn after the 2020 census could shape 2024 congressional elections in states beyond Alabama and Georgia, including Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, and Texas. Taken as a whole, those cases could affect the narrow hold Republicans have on the U.S. House. They can only do it by cheating, folks, and we got to keep them from cheating. All right, let us now go to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Brian Merchant is the tech columnist at the LA Times and the author of a new book called Blood in the Machine, The Origin of the Rebellion Against Big Tech. Blood in the Machine tells the story of the Luddites and what their plight tells us about automation today. And I've heard their movement mentioned a lot recently, particularly in relation to generative AI. For instance, news recently broke that copyrighted books, including those by Stephen King, were used to train an AI language model. And then King wrote an essay for The Atlantic in which he says he wouldn't forbid this type of thing and that anyone who would might as well be, quote, a Luddite trying to stop industrial progress by hammering a steam loom to pieces. This idea that Luddites just hated new technology is pretty pervasive. But is it accurate?
It is not accurate. It's one that's been lodged in the cultural consciousness for almost 200 years now, though, so it's hard to blame him. And, I love Stephen King. I love his writing. I love his writing on writing. But he's fallen victim to this fallacy about the Luddites, which is that they were technophobic. They wanted to stop progress itself, which couldn't be further from the truth. So what the Luddites wanted to do was to stop the machinery that was very specifically exploiting them or being used as leverage against them to reduce their quality of life, to cut their wages, to force them into factories. So the Luddites protest against machinery, again, against very specific kinds of machinery. They were technologists. They loved technology themselves in many cases, but they had issue with specific machinery being used in specific ways, namely by elites who wanted to force them into factories and degrade their standard of living.
Would you say that their attempt to rebel against this succeeded or failed?
That's a really complicated question. It was illegal to form a union in those days, so they were forced to use very creative tactics to sort of register their complaint. And when they did take up arms in this very specific way, for the first 6 months or so, they were very successful in the short term in getting some of those wages raised, getting their conditions improved, getting back some of the bargaining power they had lost. In the medium term, they were less successful because their movement was violently crushed by the British state and by the Crown and by the industrialists who the Crown was assisting. And dozens of Luddites were hung, others were killed in those protests. And then the victors of that battle got the opportunity to impress upon history this idea that Luddism is backwards looking, establishing what's basically a propaganda campaign on behalf of those industrialists to equate progress with any kind of technology at all, even technology that could exploit hundreds of thousands of people as it did.
And we're in a moment now when technology is again threatening people's jobs. Specifically, there have been a lot of stories about generative AI being used to replace copywriters, the idea that it could threaten the jobs of software coders, that instead of hiring an illustrator, places are just going to use this AI-generated art. So can we draw any parallels? What parallels can we draw between the situation the Luddites were in and then the modern automation threatening jobs today?
The way that I would put it is that the parallels are uncanny. So much is aligned with what was going on at the Luddites' time that we can really go one-to-one in a lot of cases. So here's this revolutionary seeming new technology, AI, generative AI, that its creators are claiming have vast power, can replace vast numbers of jobs. That was very similar to what was happening 200 years ago. You had the entrepreneurs adopting things like the power loom or the wide frame or the implements that would automate various parts of the cloth industry, saying, this new machinery is going to be a great boon to England. It's going to be an engine of progress. In reality, again, this is a parallel. Neither of the technologies were quite there yet, right? And so in a lot of cases, the technology could be used more powerfully by the entrepreneurs or by the industrialists as leverage or bargaining power or a means of saying, hey, we need to reduce wages because we're just going to use the machinery to do it anyways.
And you mentioned how when the Luddites were doing their protests, they didn't have unions. They didn't have the right to do this sort of collective action, as opposed to today when we have, for the first time in decades, in Hollywood, writers and actors, they're all going on strike, not solely because of AI, but that's definitely one of the issues that they're trying to deal with as part of these strikes. So do you think that they are more likely to succeed than the Luddites were?
Absolutely. I think the crucial difference is that, this is an industry that is very well organized, that has a good deal of power, and they can force their employers to the bargaining table to hash out these issues. We should be thankful that they have sort of sounded this clarion call, because in a lot of ways, the same issues are going to be coming for other industries. So the writers and the artists stand to be more successful for that reason alone, that they are organized and it's popular. Again, I think, I don't know if I mentioned, the Luddites were super popular in the day. They were like Robin Hood. They were cheered in the streets because just about everybody understood the way that the wind was blowing.
And it's not just in the case of the writer's strike that I've heard the term Luddite used. Another example is that in San Francisco right now, there's a big rollout of these self-driving robo-taxis. And there have been a lot of issues coming up around this, but one of them is a group has been protesting them by putting traffic cones on the hoods of these cars because it tells the sensors that there's an obstacle, there's something wrong, and so the car stops with no damage to it, but it is a form of protest. And some of the protesters have been compared to Luddites. Now, the issue for them is not their own employment, but they are protesting this technology. Do you think it's still fair to say that this is a sort of Luddite movement?
Yeah, I think this is a Luddite tactic through and through, and not in the derogatory sense, in the sense that these are people who are standing up for their community when democratic channels have been sort of ignored. I mean, if you look at the polling data and you look at the general sentiment, people don't want driverless cars running rampant in their communities. We've seen very viscerally how dangerous it can be, how deadly self-driving car technology can be in some cases, and what a nuisance it can be to things like emergency service providers and firefighters, policemen. They've all come out against this and said, not yet. And it's unclear, I think, to most people why it needs to be rammed through, why the experimentation period can't be longer or can't be more careful. So if we can't get the bare level of assurances and transparency from government when new technologies are rolled out, I think it's completely justified for people to basically do Luddism.
And you've mentioned that the Luddites in the short term were successful, but in the long term, they were the subject of a propaganda campaign. We've got Stephen King being like, being a Luddite is futile. It's resisting technology for no purpose. And that's the idea that many people still have hundreds of years later. So if you were going to give advice to modern Luddites, what do you think they need to do to avoid the same fate?
I think we're getting to the point to where people have at least loosened their knee-jerk reaction in that direction. We're kind of at this point again where the negative effects of technology in a lot of spheres, whether you're talking about in the working world or social media overstimulation, we're seeing a lot of the detrimental effects of technology, and we're seeing sort of a resurgence of this desire to be able to offer more input and have more say in how it's rolled out. We've sort of handed the keys to a handful of Silicon Valley giants and said, okay, see what you can come up with, and then we'll kind of deal with it. We'll take the rearguard action. But it does not have to be that way. And that's what I want to sort of beat home. Like the Luddites represented an alternate path. If we look at what they really stood for, it really comes down to a more just, more equitable, and more democratic development of technology, one that more people would have benefited from. How do we do that today?
Science Quickly is produced by Jeff Delvisio, Talika Bose, Kelso Harper, and Corinne Leong. Our show is edited by Ella Feder and Alexa Lim. Our theme music was composed by Dominic Smith. Don't forget to subscribe to Science Quickly wherever you get your podcasts. For more in-depth science news and features, go to scientificamerican.com. And if you like the show, give us a rating or review. For Scientific American's Science Quickly, I'm Sophie Bushwick.
I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when it happened. There was a sudden jolt and our submarine crashed on the seafloor. We were in total darkness.
That's Dr. Dejana Figueroa, a marine biologist and STEM teacher, talking about a deep sea dive she'll never forget.
It's funny, when I was a kid, I was afraid of the ocean. And there I was, 2 miles below the surface. But as a scientist, you prepare for that. Using our training and a little creativity, we fixed the sub and finished our experiments. The dive was just too important. Every dive gives us glimpses at things few people ever get to see. Glowing creatures, fiery undersea volcanoes. When we got back to the surface, I kissed the ground and called my mom, of course. But you know what? I wouldn't trade that dive for anything.
Dr. Figueroa uses her passion for STEM to discover new things and make the world a better place. She can STEM, so can you. Check out She Can STEM for more stories and inspiration. A message from the Ad Council.
If you love them enough to turn off your music and pretend like their music is your music,
this is Mommy's jam.
Then surely you'll check nhtsa.gov/the right seat to make sure they're in the right car seat.
Let's play it again.
Check today at nhtsa.gov/the right seat. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Donald Trump's lawyer asserts that the federal indictment alleging a conspiracy and attempt to overturn the 2020 election result is an attack on free speech. Is it? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Trump's lawyer insists that the former president believed and believes that there was voter fraud and that Trump had a First Amendment right to speak out on that issue, and therefore the case should be thrown out. Let's be clear. Donald Trump was and is entitled to the First Amendment protection of freedom of speech, and at this point we hasten to add, a presumption of innocence. And the First Amendment indeed widely protects speech, including lies. And the indictment itself concedes that Trump had a right to speak publicly about the election and to claim, even falsely, that there had been fraud. And part of the evidence cited in the indictment in support of the conspiracy and obstruction charges is what he said, the words he uttered, sometimes publicly. But the indictment is not premised on what Trump said. It is about what he did. The allegation is that he tried to get election officials to change results to help create false sets of electors. So, as National ACLU attorneys David Cole and Ben Weisner wrote in a recent widely published opinion piece, Donald Trump is not being prosecuted for constitutionally protected speech any more than a bank robber is being prosecuted for saying to the teller, "Hand over the money." The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1882. That was the day that the first Labor Day celebration and parade took place in New York City. The New York Sun printed a vivid report of the parade of 10,000 marching workers. The paper described, quote, men wearing regalia, men with society aprons, and men with flags, musical instruments, badges, and all the other paraphernalia of a procession. The article went on to say, quote, as far ahead as one one could see, and as far down the side streets as forms and faces could be distinguished, the windows and roofs and even the lampposts and awning frames were occupied by persons anxious to get a good view of the first parade in New York of working men of all trades united in one organization. All along the line, cheers were sent up. The reporter described the colorful banners carried by each trade union and noted that following the bricklayers came, quote, 2 decorated wagons containing brick arches. On each side of one of the wagons were the inscriptions 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for recreation. And get on to it, the union will never surrender. From New York, the idea of setting aside a holiday for workers spread. Oregon became the first state to officially recognize the holiday in 1897. Colorado, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and New York established a Labor Day that year as well. By 1894, 23 more states celebrated the workers' holiday. It was that year that President Grover Cleveland declared it a national holiday in response to the Pullman strike and boycott that began in Chicago. Labor Day is the day to honor the sacrifices made by labor fighting for safe and fair workplaces. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, a small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 51 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the mid-80s. Sunny conditions should prevail throughout the day, with winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Clear skies overnight with lows in the low 50s, winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, and then sunny skies tomorrow with highs once again around the mid-80s, winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. We did have a little bit of precipitation over the weekend, as I mentioned earlier, and it looks like we will be in a drying out period, though the nights will not be nearly as warm, and that is a good thing, of course. Ragweed pollen has overtaken grass pollen as the predominant pollen bothering people right now, and it is registering in the moderate range. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 19 parts per million, and that daytime UV index, though, is in the high range. It has come down one tick to level 6. That rhymes. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.01 inches. We do have low pressure dominating at the moment. Visibility is up to 9 miles, and relative humidity is at 99%. That'll dry out just a little throughout the day. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 84 degrees and sunny. Paris is 95 and sunny, and they are under a heat advisory. Rome is 92 degrees and sunny, and they are also under a heat advisory. Kabul is 70 degrees and clear. Kyiv is 74 and sunny. Hong Kong is 85 and mostly cloudy. Tokyo is 82 and mostly cloudy. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 45 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is 58 degrees and partly cloudy. Chicago, Illinois is 83 and fair, and New York, New York is 86 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. Sylvia Way of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Northern Ireland's top police officer resigned yesterday, Monday, following a series of controversies that plagued the police force, including what he described as an industrial-scale data breach. The Northern Ireland Policing Board confirmed that Simon Byrne has resigned as Chief Constable with immediate effect. Byrne faced growing pressure to step down since personal data on all serving members of the police force were mistakenly published last month in response to a Freedom of Information request. The details included surnames, initials, locations, and departments for around 10,000 officers and other personnel. Police said dissident Irish Republicans claimed to be in possession of information about police officers following the incident. The breach was particularly sensitive given the delicate security situation in Northern Ireland, which is still trying to overcome decades of sectarian violence known as the Troubles. 25 years after a peace agreement largely ended the violence, many police officers continue to shield their identities because of continuing threats from dissident members of the Republican and Unionist communities. Byrne came under more scrutiny last week when a high court judge ruled that 2 junior officers were unlawfully disciplined for an arrest made at a Troubles commemoration in 2021. The judge said the officers were disciplined to allay any threat that Sinn Féin could withdraw its support for policing Northern Ireland. Sinn Féin has insisted there was no such threat. Byrne said that he would not resign and that he was considering an appeal against the court ruling. But in a statement issued yesterday, Byrne said it was time for someone new to lead the force.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Associated Press staff bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Authorities in Russia arrested a mathematician on terrorism charges yesterday, Monday, after he had just completed a prison sentence for hooliganism. The latest step in a years-long Kremlin crackdown on political opponents. Azat Mitkov, age 30, was detained minutes after his release from a penal colony over about 600 miles east of Moscow, according to Russian media reports. His lawyers, Svetlana Sidorkina, told Russian state news agency TASS that Mitkov was charged with justifying terrorism and refused to plead guilty. Mitkov was arrested in 2019 and accused of attacking a Moscow office of the Kremlin's ruling United Russia Party, allegations he rejected. At the time, he was a postgraduate student pursuing an advanced degree in math and professed anarchist views. He accused authorities of torturing him in detention. A Moscow court convicted him of hooliganism in 2021 and sentenced him to 6 years. Human Rights Watch called the conviction clearly unjust and unfair. Memorial, Russia's oldest human rights group and a co-winner of the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize, declared Mitkov a political prisoner. With time he spent in pretrial detention taken into account, he was released yesterday from the IK-17 penal colony in the Kirov region northeast of Moscow. His supporters told Russian media that he was taken back into custody minutes after he came out of the facility and barely had time to speak to his relatives who were waiting outside. All right. That brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will be meeting up here tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.